Hi everybody, we are back here at the Brickstore Museum, and today we're going to take a look at the diorama, which is right now located underneath our stairway that goes to the second floor of galleries. In our recent redesign of our first gallery space, we placed this little diorama underneath our stairway, so it's much like Harry Potter, except it's more visible. This diorama is called Camp Disaster, and it was actually in a spot that's called Chattahoochee Falls on the Dead River in Maine, and it's supposed to represent September 1775. So Camp Disaster was immortalized by an author named Kenneth Roberts. He lived here in Kennebunk in his 1930 historical novel called Arundel. The book chronicles an event from an early part of the Revolutionary War where in 1775 in September, Colonel Benedict Arnold, I'll show him, he's in this diorama, he's there at the little hilltop with his hands on his hips in the blue jacket, speaking to some men sitting on the ground. He led a group of volunteers as an army from Fort Western on the Kennebec River, which is modern-day Augusta, across the uncharted territory of northern Maine. And their plan was to make a surprise attack on Quebec, which was held by the British at the time. So the men, unfortunately, were ill-prepared for the terrain, as most of us would be, even now in northern Maine. And the late autumn weather. So as those of you who live in Maine, you know that even in September when it's really sunny and sometimes nice out, suddenly it can turn pretty badly very quickly. So when they at last made their camp near the falls on the Dead River in what is now Franklin County, they were hit with a terrible storm. And, half of their supplies and most of their wooden boats were carried away by a water level that rose about 2 feet very quickly. And then, half of their journey was still ahead of them, so they were faced with starvation, lack of supplies, worsening weather, and of course illness that affects all of us. They continued on, only to arrive at the citadel of Quebec and be defeated by the British because spies had warned the British ahead of time that this group was approaching. This diorama was commissioned by the First National Bank of Boston in 1956, and it was made over a 6-month period by a man named R.W. Stanley, and he worked out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Amazingly, Stanley was able to consult with Kenneth Roberts, the author, on the details of the scene. So they worked carefully on what kind of trees would have been there, and undergrowth, and things that were on the Dead River several centuries ago, which is really impressive. So I'll zoom in here and you can see some of the details. We have men climbing with some supplies that they tried to get out of the boats. We have 2 gentlemen here trying to repair a birch bark canoe that is flipped over. Again, more men in the distance there, and I apologize for my hand reflecting on the glass here, but again, we move down and you can see these men are, even this gentleman in the green jacket, are trying to unload the supplies from the few boats that remained that weren't carried away by the river overflowing. Again, these are, gentlemen who are helping other people out, wounded people. A lot of people with their hands over others' shoulders trying to get a lift. And I'll say the funny thing about this diorama is that the museum staff, I'll show it quickly, we have a little kind of search and find for children or families or adults. So when you come to look at this diorama, you're able to search for specific things. So one of those things, so sadly I'm giving this one away, one of those things is finding a pair of pants that's hanging on a tree. So it's right in the center of the image you're looking at now. And one of the funniest responses that we ever got to this search and find is there was a little boy who was here for a third grade class field trip, and he asked where the person was who didn't have any pants on. You know, there, I will say now, there is not a person with no pants on, but I thought it was a really great show of a student who was thinking ahead of the question. So I thought that was really, really smart of him, and we luckily did not find anybody with lacking pants. But I'll show you here. So even in the background of this, you can see somebody has set up a tent. The real background of the diorama is painted, but there's more boats and men getting off of the boats over there. Again, there is Benedict Arnold in his younger days. There are indigenous peoples with him as well. There's even a dog that's sitting it's a black dog that's sitting between the two men with the green and with the green jacket, and then the man laying down with his knee up. So you can see how detailed this diorama really is. So when the museum is able to reopen, we look forward to welcoming you here to see all of the exhibits, but this one is obviously always on permanent display, and we can't wait to see you here.